Hi my dear friends, welcome back to our Unreal Engine course. I'm back for another video. In this one we're going to work on learning post-processing for our scenes, but before we get into that, if you remember correctly, in our previous session we had this sync piece that we decided to import separately with FBX extension. So I'm going to do that just now before we get into post-processing. So let's just do that first. Let me just check my layers. Let's see. Yes, so this was part of the default layer, I think. So I'm going to select it and export it. So I'm going to select it in 3ds Max. Make sure that it's at the 0, coordinate because I need the gizmo to be centered. Then I go to export selected, select a name for it and choose FBX. Okay, FBX extension 07. All right, okay, saved just like that, then click on OK. Good. Now, I'm going to import this into Unreal Engine now, but before we do that, let me just tell you, there are certain objects and items in your program of choice, for example, 3ds Max, that are too complicated. They have too many textures and materials like this one. And sometimes they become problematic when you want to export them. In those cases, you can get rid of some of the textures and materials and make that object lighter. And then it will become easier to do the importing process. So let's go to our content browser. I'm going to use this geometrics folder. I'm going to import and select my file 07. I don't need collision or nanites, so I'm going to uncheck those and select import all. And then okay, clear. Let me just close this. Let's see here. So I drag it into my scene and I think you can see that it's a lot bigger, and these things happen. Now I need to scale it back down to the size appropriate for my scene. So I scale it down. Let's see, this much I think would be appropriate. Okay, and I try to place it where it was in the original scene. All right, let's see, somewhere here. And there are objects like this that can, mess your whole scene up, but you need to pay attention to that object and see if it creates any problems. So I think we're good. So let's go to post-processing. So let me just delete this post-processing that I had, and we're going to do everything from scratch. So you can go to Outliner, and from Outliner you can just in the search box type post-processing, and that way it will become very easy to see what post-processing you have. For example, I have these two in my scene, okay, and you can see the gizmo for it. So I'm going to delete this one. Okay, let me just delete it from the list, and I'm going to delete the other one, okay, so that we don't have any post-processing. All right, so this is our scene without any post-processing. Okay, now that I don't have any post-processing, how do I add one for my scene? Now I have two ways of doing that. The first one is to go on with this add button and go to visual effects, and from that choose post-process volume. So this is one way of doing it. Another way is to go to window and select place actors, and then from visual effects again choose post-process volume. Okay, so this is the one that I added to my scene. So we have two ways, one with visual effects from that add button, and the other one with place actors. Okay, now why do we even bother adding a post-process volume to our scenes? Why do we need to do that? The most important reason is because we need to control the exposure, and exposure in simple terms is the amount of light that gets inside the lens of our camera. Okay, so we need to control that, and when we do that, we can manage our lighting quality, we can elevate that quality, and we can also control the reflections and everything light related. So for that we need to work and set up our exposure. See, as I move inside this building, the amount of light that gets into this building changes. So we can set up the exposure or the amount of exposure by going to project setting and find rendering first. So let me just find rendering here from this list. Okay, it's somewhere here, there, okay, rendering. And Let me just collapse all these tabs for you first. Let me just collapse them. And I can use this gear button, I think, on the right, let's see, to collapse them all. And from all these tabs, we need to find global illumination. And global illumination is the system used to manage our lighting. So right now it's been put on Lumen, that we're going to get into in later sessions, but we also have other systems available. You can also use no system by putting it on none, but I don't recommend that at all. So let's just leave it on Lumen, and Lumen is going to manage our lighting for us when we do this. And let me give you a little demonstration of what actually happens. So let's say that I have one source of light, like a sky here, a directional light inside. Now the secondary lights that hit the floor and get reflected to other directions are calculated based on Lumen or with the Lumen system. So here I can choose a system to calculate the secondary lights for me. I can choose a system for my reflections, and we don't really have that in Corona or V-Ray, but in Unreal Engine we can have a separate system for our secondary lights and also a separate system for our reflections, which is a very nice addition to Unreal Engine. So we can choose another method for our reflections, for example screen space and even ray tracing, which again we will get into all of them in our lighting sessions. But for now, the GI or global illumination is the system used to calculate our lights for us, and we can choose Lumen or other methods for those calculations to take place and for our lights to be rendered in our scene. We also have a Lumen tab with some options here that we're going to discuss when we are discussing Lumen lighting. So what else? Hardware ray tracing, which we can enable or disable in different categorizations, and again shadow box. So all these options lighting related will be discussed later on. Software ray tracing also again we're going to discuss later on. What else do we have here? Let me see. Oh, default settings. So if you go to default setting, we have a few options. For example, bloom. If you remember, we had the effect bloom in our scene, which was this yellow shining thing here. So let me just show you what I mean. Let me just put this to the side so that you can see it in real time. So if I enable bloom, you can see this effect here, there in the middle of the screen, this one. So we can enable or disable it. Sometimes we need this effect in certain areas, but for now we disable it. So let me just close outliner and these panels so that you can see things better. We have ambient occlusion, which again we cannot see that much right now. We're going to discuss later. But auto exposure, so right now it's on auto exposure, but we can manually set it up too. So if we disable it, we don't have any auto exposure, but if we enable it and put the auto exposure on manual with this button here, we can just change it manually. And this is a very good option for most of our scenes. Sometimes we do need to put it on auto exposure. For example, when we want to come inside the building from outside, auto exposure does a good job there. And let's see what else we have here. We have, for example, motion blur, which again is apparent when things are moving in our scene in the play mode. And when we have an animation or something, it's an effect when we are using animation and movement in our scene. Okay, let's not bother ourselves with these options. Some of them we're going to learn later on, the ones that are required for our project. So let me just close these real quick. Okay, let me just close these tabs because we're not gonna discuss these tabs anymore. So I close project setting. Let's add a post-process volume to our scene. So like I said, we go to this add button, visual effects, and add a post-process to your scene. You can use this method or the other one that I told you in the beginning of the video. So I add a detail panel too, okay, so that we can discuss these options, the ones that are required for our work. Let's see. Okay, so let's start. We have favorites here, which is used for the post-process options that are used most frequently. We can add them to that place and have them available so that we can work with them real fast. For example, I'm going to work with exposure a lot, so let me just find it and add it to my favorites. It's in exposure, sorry. And if I, for example, use this, right click on it and add it to my favorites, you can just work with it anytime you want. And if you don't have this favorites option, just click on that star and then you can have favorites. So let me just for now remove this, and let's see what else we have here. We have this transform option, which is related to the scale, the location, and the size of this box that you see, the post-process volume box. And we have lens, and we also have depth of field, which we're not gonna talk about. It's not related to our work. We talked about bloom, which was that shining effect that we had there, and we talked about that too. We also have exposure, which again we briefly talked about. We can put it on manual or auto, and exposure is not gonna do anything for us just yet. Before that, we need to go to GI, our global illumination, and select the method. For our method, I'm gonna put lumen. For reflections, I'm also gonna put lumen, so put these on lumen. Okay, now we can see that if I go inside this box here, it's kind of different. It looks kind of different from outside of the box. So outside of the box, it looks like this, but when I go inside, you can see that the lighting changes. So auto exposure is working inside that box. Okay, so this is where we need to talk about the size of our post-process volume. So we can either have it be really large and encapsulate all of our project like this, as you can see. When I go inside, the lighting changes. We either do this, and I'm gonna put it on manual and show you that too. So again, when I go inside this box, we have some kind of lighting, but when I go outside, it's kind of different. Okay, so we can either have this box encapsulate all of our project, or I can just make it really small so that the size is not, you know, that important. I can put it somewhere, for example here, and then I go to search on the right panel and search for infinite extent. Okay, you're going to have to write this down, infinite extent. And if I check this option, it doesn't matter where my box is, where my post-process box is, the exposure is gonna be present all over my project, regardless of the location of that post-process box. So remember that. Okay, so let me just close these tabs. Let me just collapse these tabs again. Let me just go to this gear option and collapse all these tabs. And we're going to discuss some other options. So remember, global illumination, put the method on lumen, okay? Do the same for reflections as well. Now, another option that we have, let me just go inside the building too. And I'm going to change the angle of my directional light that resembles the sky. Let's find a better angle, okay? And let's see. We also have this blue shade in our work, which is because of this fog here, okay? We have this high fog. I'm going to delete that so that it get rid of that blue shade, okay? So it's better now, but it's a little bit dark, okay? Our scene is a little bit dark, but don't worry about the lighting. This is not a lighting session. We're going to work on post-processing just yet. In lighting sessions, we're going to do everything for lights. For now, for our work now, I can just increase the exposure a little so that it's just a little bit brighter. So I select my post-process and I go to exposure, and I manually increase the exposure, and you can see that it's just more bright and easier to work with. So right now, let me just, this is the directional light that resembles the sky for me. I talked about this. It's present in the architecture blank, and you also have a sky, and you can just if you double click on this directional light, you can change the angle, and also you can just like angle it down so that it resembles a sundown and later in the day. You can do so many things with it. Again, we're going to work and discuss all of these options when we are working on our lighting in other sessions. For now, this would suffice. let's go back to the options that we have for our post-process volume. So let me just delete this box too. Okay, let me just find a couple of good angles and bookmark them with Control and 1, for example, with this angle, and Control and 2, another angle that we can just navigate frequently to, and another one here, Control 3, for example. Okay, I select my post-process, and let's go back to the options that we were discussing. Alright, like I said, we can put exposure on auto or manual, but what's the difference, and how does manual or auto exposure work? For you to better understand that, I'm going to give you a little demonstration, and let me just draw a shape here, something like a plane. Let's see if I have this cube and just make it narrow and something that resembles an external area that is attached to the front of our building here, something like a backyard or something. Okay, so let me just find the right scale, find the right size, and correct placement for this shape here. Okay, let's call it a plane. So I'm going to go to my perspective and look at it from the side. Let's see, I'm going to have to elevate it a little. Let's find another angle. Front, okay, there. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to go back to lit. Let's see. All right, I think it's roughly where it should be. Now I'm going to copy a few objects in that area, for example this plant here, and maybe a piece of sofa. Okay, so I'm going to copy this and make the copy and put it outside, in that outside area, for example here. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same. Let me just place it here. Okay, I'm gonna do the same with this plant here. I'm gonna make a copy of this. Let me just look at everything from the top view in the wireframe mode. Let's see, I want to just select this plant. I don't want to select anything extra, so let me just deselect the carpets and everything else. It can be a little difficult because other stuff is going to be selected, so I'm going to be careful. Let me just hide these, and okay, I selected the plant. Alright, let me just deselect these, and I'm going to copy it and put it outside. Let me just drag it there. Okay, let's go back to the perspective view. Let's see where it is. Alright, now we have the piece of sofa and we also have the plant. Now as you can see, the light here is terrible. It's like kind of burnt. It's too much light, but inside it's kind of normal and okay. But if we go outside, the light just becomes unbearably exaggerated and too much. Okay, and it's because we put this exposure manually on number 3 something. Okay, so 3 is a good number for interiors, but too much for outside areas and exteriors. So if I put it on 1, for example, inside becomes too dark and outside is okay. So let me just put it on 3. Okay, so 3 is good for the inside but not good for outside. For example, if I put this on 0.8 or maybe lower, minus 0.1, okay, this number is a good number for exterior. So right now the lighting here is okay, but inside it would have problems, and it kind of resembles real life. If you film outside under the sunlight and suddenly go inside, it takes a few seconds for your camera or smartphone to adjust to the new exposure. So what we have to do is to go to exposure here and put this on auto exposure histogram, and this would resemble that camera situation that I just talked about. So right now the lighting is okay for outside. If I go inside, it takes a couple of seconds for the lighting to change or the exposure to change and be more appropriate. If I put this on 1, it gets even more bright and more appropriate. So again, if I go outside, okay, the lighting is okay this time. It gets adjusted, and this way we have good lighting for inside and the outside. So auto exposure histogram would help us with this situation. So the next step is to just make this adjusting phase happen faster and make it quicker. Okay, so now if I just quickly go outside again and go back inside, you can see that it takes roughly 4 to 5 seconds for the lighting to get adjusted to the inside. So we have two options, speed up and speed down, that can help us manipulate that process or phase. Now let's compare. If I put, for example, 10 for speed up here instead of 3, let's compare. Let's go outside. Okay, go inside. Let's see, it takes even longer to get adjusted. All right, so if I go back inside, everything looks okay, quite fast. So I put 1 here again for a speed up. This time for a speed down, I put 10. Okay, let's do it again. Outside looks okay. Inside, quite fast. Looks good. Outside looks too bright, and it's gonna take a long time for it to get adjusted. So we have to put 10 for both of them, speed up and speed down. And this way, let's go inside. Okay, quite fast. Outside, fast again, inside. And you can see that as we go inside and outside, the lighting gets adjusted quite fast. So let's put 20 for them, even faster. Okay, it's almost seamless. And remember, we are navigating back and forth between inside and outside quite fast. In real projects, we usually use a lower camera speed and we go like this, and it takes some time to go inside, so everything's slower. All right, so take that into account as well. All right, now this was a very useful tip for our projects that I've not seen get mentioned that much. Now there are other people who do something else. For example, they have 2 post-process volumes, one for inside and one for outside. They have one here for the outside, and they put another post-process inside, and then they just adjust them differently. And that's another trick. All right, so let me just delete these items here for our demonstration. Okay, let me just delete these 2. Okay, let's just go back to our perspective view inside our building. Now let me tell you something else. In our interior projects, we usually put this exposure on manual and choose a high number like 10. Okay, for example, let's see, 10 is a good number for interiors. But when we have a sky or a directional light like this inside, 10 is too much, and we would have to use a lower value for it. For example, not 1, 5, let's say. Okay, so don't worry about these things just yet. We're going to learn about all of them when we're working on lighting. Let me just change the angle of the light or the sun. Okay, and we're gonna learn a lot when we are working on the lighting. We're gonna work on the materials too, and we're gonna correct a lot of little problems that we're gonna face, and this project is gonna be a lot better and higher quality. Okay, so back to our post-process. So among the options that we had, we talked about some of them, global illumination and the methods involved. Now we have color grading and temperature, which again is like the temperature that we have in Photoshop. With temperature, we can have a warm or cool feel or shade in our atmosphere. Okay, I can also go to global, for example, and work with contrast, have higher value for contrast, and make the juxtaposition between the bright colors and the darker colors more or less apparent. Now, a good number for contrast would be something like 1.2, which usually works fine. We also have saturation, which controls the amount of colors. For me, I can have less saturation, which gives a grayish kind of look to our work. So what else we have here? We also have the same options for our shadows. For example, we can manipulate the saturation and contrast for our shadows, but as a rule of thumb, we don't really manipulate these values until we need to for our interior works, and that's a rarity. So other than the contrast, we don't really mess with this stuff. So if I go to the game mode, you can see that we can easily navigate back and forth between inside and outside, and things generally look okay. This is not an exterior project, it's an interior project. That's why still when we go outside, we don't have a good lighting, and that's because, again, this is an interior project. So things look generally okay here. In the next session, other than the stuff that we talked about exposure, We're going to start with the lumen lighting system, which is the beginning part of our lighting session. So we're going to start with lumen. We're going to learn all about lumen, and then you will get a rough idea of lighting and how to do proper lighting for our projects. So make sure that you practice the stuff that we already covered and talked about, and in your own project put the exposure on manual for your scene and put a value of 5, for example, for the amount of exposure for your scene, so that everything is ready for lumen. And from that point going forward, we're going to work on our lighting so that it looks real good and realistic for our interior project. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I will see you in the next one.